to start on time. All right. Kurt, we're here live at the Kern County Sheriff's Department, where in about a minute or so, Sheriff Donny Youngblood is expected to start this news conference. As a matter of fact, I see Sheriff Donny Youngblood out in the hallway already now. As you mentioned, this all concerns the death investigation of David Silva, who died after coming in contact with sheriff's deputies the night of May 7th. Besides all the local media, of course, this case has drawn a lot of attention. We have a room full also of other law enforcement agencies. I see former Sheriff Carl Sparks is in the audience. Greg Williamson from Bakersfield Police Department is also here in attendance as well. What will be released, we don't know exactly because not much information has been forthcoming, but we expect the sheriff to say to release the results of the autopsy done on David Silva. The reason that the cause of death is going to be a major role in this case. Everybody, of course, wants to know how exactly David Silva died and what was this cause of death. So I'm being told that Sheriff Donny Youngblood is about ready to start, and he'll be coming into the room shortly to get this information. As a matter of fact, Stephen, we can just pan right over there, and Sheriff Donny Youngblood is now making his way into the room, and we'll get started here right now.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sheriff's Office. First of all, as you're all well aware, I have asked the FBI to conduct their own investigation, and it's independent of what we're doing, and they will have their own finding. I've also had a conversation with the district attorney yesterday and invited her to take a look in her office, to take a look at this case, to feel free to do that. On May 7th, 2013, at about 23:55 hours, we received a call of an intoxicated subject at the corner of Flower and Palm. The first deputy that arrived on scene found Mr. Silva laying on the sidewalk and in an unconscious state. He attempted to wake Mr. Silva up. He did a knuckle rub on his chest, which is a technique that we use that tends to get people up, and it woke Mr. Silva up. At one point, or more than one time, he got up on his knees as if he was going to get up, and he fell over and landed on his face. The deputy then became concerned about Mr. Silva injuring himself, so he tried to help him to his feet. As he helped him to his feet, Mr. Silva took a rigid stance, and the body tightened up, and the deputy said he felt like that he now was dealing with someone who was under the influence of narcotics as opposed to someone that was just under the influence of alcohol. He attempted to gain control of Mr. Silva. He was unsuccessful. He told Mr. Silva to submit to that he was under arrest and to submit to the arrest, or he would release his dog. Ultimately, he used a remote to release his dog from his car, and the dog engaged Mr. Silva. During this fight, the dog bit Mr. Silva several times, and at one point bit the handler. Approximately 6 minutes later, the second deputy arrives. The first deputy had already used his baton for 2 strikes on Mr. Silva. As he felt like he was losing the fight, and if he couldn't keep Mr. Silva on the ground, he was going to lose the entire incident, and his life would be in danger. The second deputy engaged with his baton and struck Mr. Silva several times. At one point, Mr. Silva picked up the canine by the throat, and the handler said he could see the hands closing in on the dog's throat. The second deputy engaged the baton with baton strikes to try and get him to let go of the dog, and the fight continued. The third deputy arrived 7 minutes after the beginning and helped the first 2 deputies try and control Mr. Silva. During that altercation, the third deputy used the baton twice. Mr. Silva continued to fight. When they would try and hold him down, he would buck them off. He tried to kick them. Shortly after that, another minute passed and 2 CHP officers arrived. The 2 CHP officers exited their vehicle and tried to help control Mr. Silva, tried to hold him down, tried to keep his feet from kicking, and at one point, one of the deputies asked if they could get a hobble, which is a device that controls the legs from kicking while you're trying to contain someone. The CHP officer got the hobble and brought it over, and about that time, deputies 4 and 5 arrive in a 2-man unit. One of those deputies is a very, very stout, large deputy who tried to control the legs of Mr. Silva, and he said he had to use all of his strength to stay on top of those legs to keep him from kicking the deputies. Once they started to get control, deputies 6 and 7 arrived. Only deputies 1, 2, and 3 used batons. After that, there were no more baton strikes. Deputies 6 and 7 were actually a gang unit that were assigned to a different assignment, but came because of the struggle. During the altercation, we now know that the baton was used by 3 deputies, and every strike was in a recognized area for law enforcement. There were, according to the autopsy and according to the pathologist, there were no strikes to the head or the neck of Mr. Silva. When we go to the autopsy report and the toxicology report, the toxicology shows that Mr. Silva had in his system amphetamine, methamphetamine, a blood alcohol of 0.095, clonazepam, and in his pocket, several hydrocodone, Vicodin, and Soma pills. The pathologist, when he completed the autopsy report, I have not spoken to him personally. He is a part-time pathologist for us that contracts a couple days a week and for several other counties. He says that the cause of death for Mr. Silva is hypertensive heart disease, interval between onset and death in his years, other conditions that contribute, acute intoxication, chronic alcoholism, severe abdominal obesity, chronic hypertension, and acute pulmonary cardiovascular strain, and the manner of death is accident. With that, I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
So, Sheriff, do you believe that anything that happened that night with your deputies contributed to the death of Mr. Silva?
I can't speculate to what pathologists might testify. I can tell you what the cause of death is and what the manner is.
If the cause of death is hypertensive death disease, is that right?
That is correct.
In layman terms, if you can, sort of explain what all that technical talk means.
I can tell you a lot about hypertension. It can cause the heart to be enlarged. In this case, that was the case. He had chronic or acute, severe hypertension, and brought on by maybe a lifestyle and maybe genetics, heredity. I don't know.
And the manner of death is accidental?
Accidental.
There's going to be a portion of the community that feels, no matter how many reports you come up with and so on and so forth, they're going to always feel that somehow this is being covered up and somehow, that this is trying to be swept under the rug. Well, how would you respond to those people who are still concerned even after everything you just said?
Well, I think that the general public that I've been in contact with in the last 2 weeks did what I asked them to do. They took a wait-and-see attitude. I wish I could say that about the media. The media, in my opinion, raced to be first, didn't race to be right. And I think that the media caused a lot of this hysteria that occurred in this community. This type of incident is not uncommon in law enforcement across this country. This particular case and the way that this was handled in the media sent shockwaves all the way across the United States. Every law enforcement officer in this country was in question. And as I said in the beginning, if you would wait and be patient, I will give you the facts as I know them. And that's what I'm doing today.
Why weren't the tapes released sooner? If we knew that one of the tapes wasn't there right away, or one of the cell phone videos, why wasn't that set up front?
What we learned is that if we released part of the investigation, we would be required to release all of it, and we were not completed with the investigation.
Sheriff, have you heard, or are you looking into the possibility that supposedly some deputies involved used social media to text about this incident, how badly Mr. Silva's condition was, or that he had been hit with baton strikes?
I have no information about any deputy using social media to do what you just suggested.
Are you looking at, or will you look into that?
I have no information that that has occurred. If I get information that anything has occurred that appears to be improper, I'll investigate it.
You say there were no strikes to the head. Can you explain where all the bruising on his head comes from?
The pathologist said that Mr. Silva had an abrasion on the right side of his face that was consistent with falling down. It was not consistent with a baton strike.
Some people had said he was hog-tied, so the correct term for that would be hobbled then?
That's correct.
Do you know how long that was in place for, and what is your guys' policy when it comes to using that?
It appeared that it was a very short period of time, and it's used only as a last resort. It's important to know that one of the Highway Patrol officers in this case has been on 12 and a half years. And he said this is the most violent resisting arrest that he has seen in 12 and a half years.
Have you been able to determine whether or not the second cell phone ever contained video?
My knowledge is that no one has been able to answer that question yet. The FBI still has the phones. I'm hoping that they are able to answer that with certainty, one way or the other.
So have you heard back from the FBI on their investigation into the cell phone video?
I have not spoken to the FBI since the day I invited them in.
Is it unusual or concerning at all that one of the deputies involved in this incident was also involved in another fatal arrest several years prior?
Now, which one would that be? Which incident would you?
The arrest of Mr. Moore that involved the 27 taser deployments and baton strikes, and I guess he died of cardiac arrest at the scene.
I'm not sure that you have the name correct. Are you talking about an incident that occurred in the desert? Or which incident are you talking about?
I believe this one was here in town, is my understanding.
I don't think we have that many tasers. I'm sorry, if you could be more specific, I could tell you.
Well, the deputy I'm referring to specifically is Brian Greer.
And he was deputy number 6 and 7 that arrived here. No baton strikes. He assisted. The event was pretty much ended by the time he got there. He helped hold Mr. Silva down.
How do you think the methamphetamine affected his actions, or any of the other drugs? Sometimes people say when people are on drugs, they're a lot stronger, a lot more violent.
We know that methamphetamine is a horrible drug, and we know that when you mix drugs with other drugs that it can cause erratic behavior. In this particular case, the deputies described someone who was under the influence of methamphetamine and other drugs and was extremely strong, was extremely large, and it took this number of deputies to control him, to keep him from hurting himself or hurting deputies. And sometimes in the confrontation, you have to do what you have to do to keep someone from hurting themselves or hurting officers. We want to go home at night as well.
Sheriff, the other part of the incident that also concerns the public is the fact that, as has been mentioned, deputies went to the home to seize those cell phones. They detained the family for several hours, a family which were not criminal suspects, a family who were in their own home and was not a crime scene. And that has really, from what I understand, also concerned law enforcement agencies because of what they can or may not be able to do in the future on this. Where does that stand right now as far as whether you guys acted legally in detaining those people in their own home?
Well, first of all, the media reported, I can't remember the number of hours we were in the home. Anybody have it? 12, 13, 11? The first time we were there for 2 hours and 29 minutes, we left. The second time we were there for 2 hours and 11 minutes. That's a long ways from what was reported in the media. The first time that we went there was to conduct interviews. And during those interviews, we learned that people had or potentially had evidence. They said that they did. We're obligated as peace officers and police officers to seize evidence. We before we get a search warrant on the first phone, the gentleman decided to give it up. He was free to leave at any time, as anyone there was free to leave at any time. No one was held hostage. You just couldn't take the phone that had the evidence. Once he gave us the phone, while we were in the process of getting a search warrant, he left. The second one, we obtained a search warrant. We waited 2 hours and 11 minutes to get that search warrant and to seize that phone. That's what we do. The phones are unique and they're new. We understand that. But we believed evidence was on there, and I think my guys know better than to come back without the evidence. That's what we do. That's their job. The courts will rule whether we acted correctly or whether we did not, I'm sure.
But in those 2 hours that you were there, I understand the family's members were not free to leave, come and go?
That is not true. They were free to leave at any point. What they couldn't do is have family members that weren't there already come in for officer safety reasons. While we're standing waiting for the search warrant, we're not going to let 6 or 8 or 10 more people come in the house and have an issue. So they couldn't come in, but anyone was free to leave. They just couldn't take the phone.
And as far as you know, did deputies ever tell the people who had the cell phones that they could not post that video on Facebook or any other social media site?
No. What was actually said was, the question was asked of them, have you placed this on any of the social media networks? There was no direction that they could not. If you take a look at the witness statements in this case, and then look at the evidence, it's pretty clear that we had a group of witnesses out there that didn't like law enforcement from the beginning. And if you look at the statements that they made, this number of baton strikes to the head that didn't exist by eyewitnesses, and it goes on and on. So, I think the public is going to judge us by the facts. I think the public is going to judge us by the evidence, not by propaganda.
Was he hogtied when he went into cardiac arrest?
He was hobbled, and one of the deputies noticed that it was checking his pulse 3 times in 30 seconds. And during that time, the pulse became weak, and the ambulance attendants showed up at exactly that time. They unhobbled him, they checked him, he had no pulse, and they started CPR.
Did deputies ever administer CPR, or was it only
Not that I'm aware of. I believe it was the ambulance crew.
The call this morning for an oversight committee into these matters for the community, what's your take on that?
It's a great question, but I will tell you, this case personifies exactly why a citizen review board is not a good idea. I, as the sheriff or the chief of police, we deal in facts, we deal in law, and we deal in policy. We don't deal in emotion. The public deals in emotion. The media controls the public's emotions. We've seen that. There were public people and news media that wanted the deputies hung before we even had a trial. We received hundreds of emails throughout the country. We received threats. We had to guard our deputies. Deputies had to guard deputies. We had to take people off the streets to guard deputies because of this hysteria and the threats made against deputy sheriffs, and ongoing to today. Still coming.
Have any arrests been made in those threats?
From outside of our county, no, none that I'm aware of. But from inside the county, we've had a really, really great response. I think the people listened, and they were patient, and they're understanding.
Can you tell us who was each deputy, like 1 through 7? 6 was Greer, correct?
Now, we learned our lesson. We're not releasing deputy names in major incidents.
Sheriff, can you explain a little bit more about this hobbling, how that works?
I've told you all I can tell you about hobbling and hog tying.
Are those deputies still receiving protection?
The deputies are going to be cleared to go back to work. We'll decide in the future when they will go back to work and when it's safe and when things have calmed down. We're going to wait and see what happens after this press conference, and then we'll decide the next day or two what to do.
Any idea how long the FBI will spend investigating this?
You'd have to ask them. And hopefully the district attorney will take a look at this. We are trying to be as transparent with our public that we serve as we possibly can be. It's unprecedented to invite the FBI in to conduct their own investigation, or to invite the district attorney in to take a look at any of the evidence that we've got. And if you find something, do what you got to do. But there's nothing there.
How vindicated do you feel today by these results?
It's not vindication. I'll be honest with you, very disappointed in the way the local media handled this case from the beginning. When you put a headline in a newspaper that says what that says, that's the igniter for what happened, and it's shameful. Anybody else? Thank you all for coming.
Okay, so that, all right, so that about wraps it up. We're going to have Donny Youngblood speaking roughly for about 20 minutes on in-depth investigation of David Silva and our corner for some key points as Mr. Record said. As to the cause of death, the manner of death is ruled to be accidental. The cause of death, he said, was hypertension.